For 11 months, the small town lived with the thought that neighbor Esther had done the unthinkable. She would have cooked Camila in a huge cauldron in her shed. Reporters already called this case the most terrible in the history of the region. Society was ready to believe in cannibalism, and the police hesitated with a final conclusion. Only after almost a year did the truth come to light. Camila had indeed died, but the circumstances were completely different. No one had cooked anyone, yet the secret later revealed was no less shocking. It happened on a Tuesday evening, on the 4th of May 2021, in a small settlement in southern Chile, in the Mall province. At 2015, Camila left her house and told her mother that she was going to neighbor Esther to watch a film and spend the night. Such visits were common. Esther's house was only a 2-minute walk away, and the family had known this woman well for a long time. Esther G., 47 years old, widow, lived alone and had never aroused suspicion among the neighbors. On the morning of the 5th of May, however, Camila did not return home. The worried mother knocked at the neighbor's door, but the door was not opened immediately. Esther looked slightly confused. Camila left yesterday evening right after the film. She said she had changed her mind about spending the night. The mother reported the disappearance to the police, and after just 2 days, terrible news shook the entire region. The police had searched the shed in the yard of Esther's house and there confiscated a huge aluminum cauldron with a capacity of 45 liters. It contained a thick, cloudy broth with bone pieces. The police officers immediately made public information that horrified the population. The bones found in the pot resembled human finger bones. The press immediately picked up the story. The headlines screamed, "Cooked child, neighbor, cooked girl." The quiet town, which had never before known crimes of this magnitude, suddenly found itself at the center of national and even international media attention. The investigations immediately brought to light several details that made the case even more confusing. First, the back door of Esther's house was wide open. That night, it had rained lightly. The ground was moist. The investigators documented a clear trail of a small shoe that led from the door to the garden gates. The impression was fresh. Second, an interesting detail emerged. Esther had an official license for slaughtering and butchering goats for selling meat at the local market. Butchering tools were found in the shed, including a small axe with traces of a dried brownish liquid. The analysis had not yet been conducted, but the picture was already drawing itself dark and ominous. The last recorded actions of Camila also became known. At 20:30, she sent her mother a brief message. "We're watching a film. Everything okay?" This was the last contact with Camila. After 21:05, the phone sent no more signals and was outside the network range. The operators officially confirmed this fact. Rumors and theories immediately spread in the town. Esther immediately became the main suspect. She was the last to see Camila alive. The strange broth with suspicious bones was found at her place, and the woman was obviously nervous during the first interrogations. Reporters constantly observed her house. Public opinion was extremely negative, and the Carabineros, Chilean police, already hinted at charges. However, another version emerged. Several neighbors reported to the police that on the evening of Camila's disappearance, they had seen a white pickup near Esther's house. The car stood there around 22:15, an hour after Camila's phone had stopped being reachable. Witnesses described it as unknown for the area, but no one had remembered the license plate. The investigators began checking all surveillance cameras in the vicinity to find the mysterious vehicle, but so far without success. The loudest evidence that the police presented in the first phases of the investigation were the bone fragments found in the cauldron. One of the police officers who spoke unofficially with a reporter from a local publication said that the bones found are very similar in their form to human finger bones. The press immediately called this direct evidence of an act of cannibalism. Horror and panic spread lightning fast through the town. People began demanding the fastest possible arrest of Esther. A storm of threats and hatred broke over her in social networks. The woman was forced to hide in her own house and did not even go out shopping. The police placed her under round-the-clock protection to protect her from possible vigilante justice, but the investigations continued, and soon the version about human bones began to show first cracks. Experts began cautiously suggesting that the bone fragments found might come from animals, possibly from goats that Esther legally butchered for sale. On the 12th of May, a week after the confiscation of the cauldron and the remains, a preliminary report of the forensic examination was prepared. The document contained a formulation that caused the investigators to be restrained with loud statements. The bones are probably not human. Probably. This word became the reason for endless speculation. The police officially refused to confirm the cannibalism version, but the final conclusion was delayed day after day for some reason. This led to even more rumors and assumptions. Soon after the preliminary conclusion of the forensic experts, the first discrepancies and contradictions in the version of the police and the press began to emerge. Experts began to re-examine every piece of evidence. Soon it would turn out that the picture that seemed so obvious in the first days concealed a completely different story that was complex and completely unexpected for everyone. But almost a year would pass before the revelation of the whole truth. 11 months of uncertainty and suspicion, after which the story of Camila would become even more tragic and amazing for the town. Why does a lonely goat meat dealer conduct nightly slaughtering without a slaughter license? The investigations proceeded relentlessly. While hot debates about the preliminary conclusion regarding the bones found continued in the media, the investigators turned their attention to Esther G. The police understood that the only way to shed light on the Camila case was to examine suspect number 1 precisely. The town knew Esther as a withdrawn woman who avoided loud company and celebrations. She lived modestly and quietly at the edge of the village and avoided any unnecessary contact. But the investigators were not interested in personal sympathies or antipathies of the neighbors, but in details that could point to the actual motives and circumstances of the crime. Esther's house and basement were carefully checked for several days. There, between gloomy walls and shelves with homemade preserves, the police stumbled upon something they had not expected. In an old freezer, 14 frozen goat carcasses were found. This fact was not criminal in itself. Trading in goat meat was Esther's main source of income. But the problem lay elsewhere. Her license provided for slaughtering and processing only during the day, exclusively under health control. However, the records in a notebook found nearby showed that nighttime slaughtering had become the norm for her. The investigators quickly established that every date in these records corresponded exactly with the nights when neighbors noticed that lights burned long in Esther's house and strange sounds could be heard. The details of these records looked strange. The slaughter time was always between 22:30 and midnight. These correspondences could not be coincidental. Then the police discovered medical documents from the local clinic. Without many details and specific diagnoses, they contained records from a psychiatrist from the year 2014. The psychiatrist noted in Esther an increased tendency towards strict order, compulsive pedantry, and most disturbingly, persistent aversion to underage neighbors. Without naming concrete diagnoses, these records confirmed the police's suspicion. Esther had her peculiarities, and they might be much more serious than it originally seemed. During questioning at the police station, Esther remained tense but did not lose her confidence. The investigator asked directly what she had been doing on the evening of Camila's disappearance between 9 and midnight. Esther answered dryly and clearly, "I was watching a series. Every evening a new episode airs. I never miss one." The police immediately checked her alibi with the cable television company. It turned out that her television signal was indeed active at the stated time. This could be a strong argument in her favor, but a new circumstance emerged that drastically worsened Esther's situation. One of the nearest neighbors testified, Around 22:40, exactly at the time when Esther was allegedly watching a series, he clearly heard axe blows from her shed. According to his words, this lasted several minutes, after which it became quiet again. The suspect's alibi was thus strongly called into question. The investigators kept returning to this contradiction. What was more important? An active television, or the testimony of a witness who had clearly heard an axe? Meanwhile, the scandal in the press continued to grow around another police trick. The investigator, who was probably trying to accelerate Esther's confession, deliberately showed journalists a photo of the small axe that had previously been confiscated from the shed. In the photo, a dark brown coating was clearly visible. The police did not directly claim that it was Camila's blood, but the hint was obvious. Reporters quickly thought up the rest themselves, and the news exploded again with headlines: Esther's bloody axe, new evidence against the cannibal. Despite the lack of official confirmation, public opinion was already completely against Esther. The city residents believed almost unanimously. The woman was obviously hiding something. Her involvement seemed increasingly convincing. A return to normal life was no longer possible for her. Finally, after several days of endless speculation and media pressure, the results of the laboratory analysis of the axe came. And again, the conclusion was completely unexpected. The laboratory experts gave a clear and unambiguous answer. The coating on the blade was exclusively goat blood. Furthermore, not a single human cell was found throughout the entire house and on Esther's belongings. The complete absence of Camila's biological material seemed incredible and seriously called into question the entire prosecution version. But even now, the investigators hesitated to completely remove Esther from the suspect list, because the absence of DNA did not mean absolute non-involvement. Perhaps she was more careful than the police assumed, or simply knew how to erase traces. Nevertheless, such conclusions prompted the investigators to temporarily reduce pressure on Esther. The questions became even more urgent. The picture of the crime blurred, became less clear and obvious than at the beginning. If Esther really had nothing to do with it, if the suspicions were false, it meant only one thing. The person who had taken Camila that night was still at large, and the police had no idea of their identity. It was necessary to urgently introduce new figures into the case. And at this stage of the investigation, all those involved and eyewitnesses seemed to understand. The most important and unexpected was yet to come. It turns out that Camila's father, Sergio A., had received a restraining order a year ago for threats against his ex-wife. While the investigation's attention swung back and forth between suspicion against Esther and the elusive driver of the white pickup, a new detail surfaced. It had to do with Camila's family. The investigators decided to look more closely at the environment of the missing 9-year-old, and that meant examining her closest relatives, especially the parents, carefully. Camila's family appeared normal at first glance. A small, tidy house, a single mother caring for her daughter, and a father whom the neighbors rarely saw. Nevertheless, behind the simplicity and typicality of this picture, details were hidden that gradually emerged and cast doubt on the obviousness and clarity of what had happened. In the detailed examination of the family's living circumstances, the investigators quickly encountered a fact that had not previously been disclosed. It turned out that the girl's father, Sergio A., had officially received a court order a year earlier that prohibited him from approaching his ex-wife and the house where they had once lived together. The reason for this court decision was threats that he had repeatedly made against his ex-wife after the divorce. The documents contained no details about these threats, but the fact was officially confirmed and immediately gave the family story a completely different tone. An additional check of the family members' phones and electronic devices brought disturbing details to light. In Camila's correspondence, messages were discovered that her father had sent her a week before her disappearance. Sergio wrote to his daughter briefly and sharply, "Mom is lying to you about me." Such messages clearly indicated a conflict between the parents that could lead to unpredictable actions. This troubled the police, especially given the father's unstable character and the previously issued restraining order. It also turned out that the family had serious financial difficulties. The house had been bought with a mortgage, and payments for it had been delayed in recent months. The neighbors remembered another strange episode. At the end of April, literally a few days before Camila's disappearance, they noticed Sergio carrying several large boxes out of the house. This was unusual since the man had not lived there for a long time and, according to his ex-wife's statement, practically never appeared. No one knew exactly what was in these boxes, but this event did not match the mother's claims about the complete lack of contact with her ex-husband. The investigators summoned Camila's mother again for additional questioning. Her answers were confident and categorical. She claimed, "Sergio hasn't been here for months. We have barely communicated, except briefly on the phone, and that always ended in conflict." The police checked these statements using the geolocation data from Sergio's mobile phone, and here, the investigators encountered a fact that completely contradicted the mother's words. On the night when Camila disappeared, Sergio's phone was registered within 3 kilometers of Esther's house. This meant that the ex-husband was very nearby, even if not directly at the scene. This did not prove his guilt, but seriously shook the reliability of the mother's statements. Someone was clearly not telling the whole truth. The investigators, confronted with such a contradiction, began to allow for a possible motive: Sergio's attempt to forcibly take his daughter to himself. This version quickly leaked to the press, and journalists immediately seized upon it and blew the scandal to enormous proportions. New headlines once again changed the course of public opinion. Family kidnapping. Did Sergio kidnap his own daughter to take revenge on his ex-wife? The city sank into panic and fear again. In addition to the fact that residents were already devastated by the terrible versions of cannibalism, they now began to suspect Camila's father and saw in him a person capable of extreme measures due to personal conflicts. Sergio suddenly came under strong public pressure, although it had not yet been proven that he was connected in any way to Camila's disappearance. But as soon as the investigators began to delve deeper into this version, new facts emerged that strongly contradicted it. The police gained access to video footage from a surveillance camera at a gas station 70 kilometers away from the disappearance site. The recording clearly showed Sergio calmly refueling his car at 22:12 on the same night. This meant that he could not physically be simultaneously at Esther's house and at the gas station. The ex-husband's alibi was partially confirmed, and the version of his involvement in the events of the night of the disappearance began to crumble before the investigators' eyes. Nevertheless, the police were not ready to completely remove Sergio from the suspect list. The geolocation data was too ambiguous, and his conflict with his ex-wife was too deep and personal. The suspicions, though weakened, remained part of the investigation. At this stage, the investigations began to waver significantly and tried to cling to every convincing version, either Esther with her secret nocturnal slaughtering, or the mysterious driver of the white pickup, or the father, entangled in his own emotions and contradictions. While the police tried to unravel these complex and obviously confusing lines, nobody noticed a small but important detail that lay quietly in the backyard of the house where Camila had disappeared. This very detail, which was discovered much later, would soon turn the entire case upside down and steer the investigation in a completely different direction. In July, a farmer finds a children's sneaker size 31 with the embroidered initials CA at the Las Trillas Canal. While the investigation wandered helplessly in the labyrinth of contradictions and false evidence, every new circumstance only complicated the picture. Numerous versions emerged and collapsed one after another. But in the middle of summer, an event occurred that once again changed the course of the investigation and directed attention back to the starting point, to Esther's house and its immediate surroundings. On the 13th of July, more than 2 months after Camila's disappearance, a local farmer walking along the Las Trillas Canal discovered something unusual. It was a white children's sports shoe, thoroughly covered with dried mud. On the side surface of the shoe, the initials CA were carefully embroidered. The sole size was 31, exactly the size that the missing Camila wore. The farmer did not try to examine the find himself. He immediately reported it to the police. The sneaker was immediately sent to the laboratory. The investigators showed professional caution and packed the shoe in a special paper bag to preserve as much biological material as possible. The experts immediately noticed a key detail. The soil that adhered to the sole matched completely in composition and structure with the earth taken from the backyard of Esther's house. This meant one thing. The shoe belonged to Camila, and she was wearing it that evening when she disappeared. But inside the sneaker, an even more significant discovery awaited. Experts discovered male epithelial traces that did not belong to any of the already known persons connected with this case. In the laboratory, a comparison with Sergio's DNA samples was quickly carried out, but the result was negative. The new DNA clearly pointed to an unknown man whose identity still had to be established. The police returned to the farmer who had found the shoe. He immediately remembered a detail that he had not mentioned before, since he had not attached any special significance to it. I saw a pickup that night. It was standing right at the canal, around 11 o'clock in the evening of the 5th of May. I remember exactly it had a strong hunting bumper. I found it strange to see a car in such a place so late, but at that time I did not attach any importance to it. The farmer's statement interested the investigators, as it led them back to an early version with the white pickup that had previously been mentioned by witnesses. This time, however, it had to be checked more precisely and thoroughly. The investigators began to cross-reference data about all local vehicle owners. The vehicle database check showed that Sergio only owned a blue sedan, and Esther had no car at all and not even a driver's license. This meant that the pickup belonged to someone else. The investigators were again forced to expand the circle of suspects and examine other local residents more closely. As a result of an in-depth analysis, the local hunter, Luis R., came under suspicion. This man was known to the police primarily for problems with the law related to wildlife smuggling. Most importantly, Luis actually owned a white pickup with a characteristic hunting bumper that perfectly matched the farmer's description. This was the first convincing lead in a long time, and the police decided to check him thoroughly. Luis was summoned for questioning. The man behaved calmly and provided his data to the investigation without panic, claiming that he had not even been near the Las Trillas Canal on the night of the 5th of May. "I was hunting far from here. I can prove it," Luis explained confidently. The investigators immediately checked the log data from the road cameras that registered the license plates of cars on the roads. Soon the police received information that completely exonerated Luis. The cameras had clearly captured his white pickup at a distance of more than 120 kilometers from the location of Camila's disappearance, exactly on the night of the 5th of May. The farmer who had pointed to the white pickup had simply been mistaken. Memory proved unreliable in the moonlight, and he had probably confused the colors of the cars. The version with Luis and his pickup immediately collapsed, like the previous hypotheses. Nevertheless, despite the false trail, the fact of finding the shoe remained the most important evidence proving that Camila had left Esther's house independently and alive. Thus, the investigators were forced to completely reconsider the original versions related to the pickup. Now, the white car no longer seemed to be the key to the solution, but the significance of the found shoe could not be overestimated. This find clearly indicated that Camila could come out of Esther's house unharmed, and all previous suspicions against the neighbor were weakened again. Meanwhile, the police officers concentrated so intensely on distant and vague traces that they no longer noticed more obvious details, those that literally lay at their feet. The investigation, which was gradually approaching its end, repeatedly proved how unreliable human memory is, and how easily one can overlook something important that lies directly in front of them. Miguel, a homeless metal collector, regularly slept under a canopy opposite Esther's house. On the night of the 4th of May, he disappeared from his usual place. The investigation once again reached a dead end. The version with the white pickup had collapsed. Luis R. was cleared of suspicion, and the found shoe confirmed that Camila had left Esther's yard independently, but gave no answer to the main question. The investigators were forced to return again to the scene of the disappearance and examine closely those who were in immediate proximity. Thus, Miguel, better known by the nickname Trower, appeared on the horizon of the case. He was a well-known personality in the neighborhood, a homeless metal collector who was constantly on the move searching for scrap, empty cans, and old household appliances. Miguel often spent the night under a canopy at an old warehouse directly opposite Esther's house. His presence had long ceased to attract the attention of the residents, and the police had not even considered it necessary to have a conversation with him until this moment. But precisely on the night from the 4th to the 5th of May, nobody had seen Miguel at his usual place. This seemed suspicious. The police decided to check this man more closely. When the officers tracked down Miguel, they found several items on him that looked suspicious at first glance. A small lockpick, an ordinary screwdriver, and a thin bracelet, obviously for a child, without a clasp. The bracelet did not belong to Camila. Her mother confirmed this. But by size and type, it clearly fit a child of about the same age. When asked where he got this item from, Miguel could not answer, and only said that he had found it on the street and wanted to turn it in along with the metal scrap. After checking the police archives, it turned out that Miguel had previously come into the sights of law enforcement authorities. A year ago, he was arrested for stealing chickens in one of the neighboring streets. This information did not make him a serious criminal in the eyes of the police, but it clearly strengthened the suspicion. The investigators questioned Miguel extensively. He remained calm, without nervousness and aggression. He confidently informed the police that he had not spent the night at the warehouse on the night of Camila's disappearance because he had gone to a homeless shelter. His words were easy to verify, and the officers immediately contacted the shelter administration. However, the shelter's registration book for that night was unexpectedly empty. The administrator explained this by the change of the duty employee, who for some reason did not keep records. The employee confirmed that he had indeed been on duty that night, but could not specifically remember Miguel, since many people passed through the shelter. Additionally, the police discovered strange traces of white dust on Miguel's clothing, which experts quickly identified as construction lime. When asked where it came from, Miguel calmly answered, "I unloaded cement at a construction site. Everything there is full of this dust. It's hard to wash off, you know." This explanation sounded logical, but the investigators were not completely convinced given the overall picture of the case and the nervousness in society that demanded quick results. The lime became the subject of increased attention from the investigators, as they had already heard versions from experts about how perpetrators sometimes try to hide traces of crimes with the help of construction mixtures and chemical reagents. The investigators immediately thought of the version that Miguel could have used lime to dissolve evidence. Miguel worked at construction sites and helped repair old machines. Among other things, he sometimes performed occasional work for owners of special machines, for example, for a walking excavator that was used for work in quarries. Given the theory of dissolving traces, the police obtained permission to search the excavator and the surrounding area where Miguel might have worked. This was a serious decision, but nothing suspicious was found there. Despite extensive checks, no traces of a crime were found, which caused additional frustration among the investigators who lost valuable time on another false lead. The situation changed drastically when the police gained access to the surveillance camera recordings of the home. Despite the absence of entries in the journal, one of the cameras nevertheless showed that exactly at 23:10 at night of Camila's disappearance, Miguel calmly entered the building of the home. This fact completely confirmed his words and destroyed the conclusive accusation version against him. The suspicions collapsed again, leaving the police in another dead end. Miguel was no longer on the list of main suspects, although it would have been premature to completely cross out all questions about him. He still remained a person who might have noticed or known something without suspecting it. The investigators had to take a step back again. The suspicion against Miguel was officially weakened, but one detail gave the experts no peace: the lime. It could indeed have stuck to his clothing anywhere. Construction site, repair work, old machines. but the police could not yet be sure of this. This seemingly insignificant detail would lead the investigators to a completely unexpected trail sometime later, which they did not even suspect yet. Still searching for a new key to the solution, the investigation had to recheck the already known facts. But one thing became increasingly clear. The most important answer was still hidden in little things and details that at first glance seemed random and insignificant. Camila's friend, Selena R., 9, unexpectedly remembers a conversation. Camila was afraid to go into Esther's yard. It smelled there, and a man was walking around. While the investigators struggled with contradictory evidence and unconvincing alibis, a new thread unexpectedly emerged that came from Camila's immediate environment itself. It came from a person who had not been mentioned in the case before, from Camila's close friend Selena R. The officers decided to question the children in the neighborhood again. The interview was conducted according to the strict PACE protocol, without the presence of parents and with the participation of a child psychologist to exclude the influence of adults. Camila's friend Selena initially answered uncertainly and avoided looking the psychologist in the eyes, but soon remembered a seemingly insignificant conversation that had taken place a few days before the disappearance. Camila said she was afraid to go into Esther's yard. It smelled bad there, and there was also a man who was walking around all the time. She didn't like him. This new information prompted the investigators to immediately engage in the case with doubled attention. Selena was carefully questioned in more detail. Without excessive emotional details, the girl described the man quite clearly and confidently, as far as her childish memory allowed. He had a beard and a green jacket. In the evenings, after dinner, he carried out some heavy bags. I saw him a few times, but always from a distance. These statements were important for the police. The investigators immediately put together a photo lineup of 6 similar men selected based on the description. Selena was presented with the photos for identification. The girl did not hesitate and quickly pointed to photo number 4. This person was Raul G., Esther's younger brother, whose name had not appeared in any investigation protocol until this moment. The investigators immediately began checking the new suspect. First, the mother of Esther and Raul was questioned, an elderly woman who lived separately. When asked about Raul's visit to his sister, she confirmed without hesitation. Yes, he came to her on the 4th of May. He brought vegetables from his farm in the evening. I didn't see anything strange. Raul was summoned for questioning, where he behaved extremely calmly. He immediately confirmed that he had indeed visited his sister, but emphasized emphatically that he had left her house before sunset. I left around 7 in the evening. I was only very briefly at my sister's. My phone was dead because I had forgotten to charge it. I always do that. I forget it. But checking the truth of his words was difficult. Raul's phone was indeed switched off. Geolocation data was missing, which only strengthened the investigation's suspicion. The girl's statements quickly leaked to the press and again triggered public resonance. In newspapers and on television, it was immediately discussed whether children under the influence of adults or the investigation itself could involuntarily invent or distort something. The press criticized the police and accused them of putting pressure on minor witnesses and not being careful enough with children's statements. The police themselves also handled Selena's statements carefully. The investigators understood that a child's memory could distort details, especially after such a long time after the event. This caution only heated up the debates and triggered additional suspicions and doubts in society. However, another discovery by the forensic scientist turned the picture around again and directed the suspicions back to Raul. The experts, who continued the examination of the same axe that had previously been recognized as free of human biological traces, unexpectedly discovered microparticles of glass fiber on its blade and handle. This was a characteristic material from which handles of hunting knives are typically made. Exactly such a knife was used by Raul on his farm, which officers confirmed after a preliminary questioning of the man's acquaintances. This find became the first material evidence connecting Raul to the crime scene, and now the investigation could not ignore his involvement. Despite the absence of direct charges, Raul finally became a figure of priority interest for the investigators. After the discovery of the glass fiber, the police immediately filed an application with the prosecutor's office for a search warrant for the area belonging to Raul G. The document included, among other things, a special note to thoroughly examine the old sewage tank in the yard, which had previously not attracted the investigation's attention at all. Despite the increased interest in Raul, the police did not officially accuse him of the crime. His figure was still shrouded in fog, and the investigation carefully avoided hasty conclusions. But the appearance of a new detail led the investigation inexorably to a new, possibly final resolution. While the officers waited for permission for the search, none of them could know with certainty what exactly the old concrete pit in Raul's backyard would reveal. Meanwhile, the press continued to criticize the police for the apparent indecision and chaos in the investigations. However, the investigators understood very well that they were now approaching the solution of this complex and confusing story. All the little things, all the inconsistencies and suspicions should soon come together into a coherent picture that would finally lift the veil of mystery from the case of Camila's disappearance. September 2021, a team from the waterworks Nuevo Sur conducts a ground-penetrating radar examination of the courtyards. Under the old plastic sewage tank at Esther's, the device registers a dense organic mass. The events developed quickly and disturbingly. The search warrant for Raul's property had been obtained, but at the same time the neighboring yard, Esther's yard, came into the center of the investigation again. In September 2021, almost 5 months after Camila's disappearance, the utility company Nuevo Sur conducted a planned inspection of the communication facilities and used ground-penetrating radar in the process. The crew was supposed to check the condition of old sewage tanks in this area before the reconstruction of the sewerage system. The work proceeded as usual until the ground-penetrating radar detected an anomaly in the ground directly under the old plastic sewage tank, which was located in the backyard of Esther's house. The technology clearly showed the presence of a large and dense organic object at a depth of about 1 meter. The workers immediately stopped the inspection and called an engineer. Engineer Felipe L. arrived, who personally conducted a repeat scan and confirmed the original data. He measured carefully and fixed the size of the object on the radargrams. The contours of the anomaly were clearly outlined and had approximate parameters of 110 centimeters length and about 40 centimeters width. The depth was about 0.9 meters. Felipe immediately contacted the police and handed over all investigation materials to them. The officers quickly arrived at the location and began the inspection. The sewage tank looked abandoned. The lid was covered with garbage and construction debris as if someone had tried to mask its true condition. During the first inspection, the experts immediately noticed fresh lime traces on the inner walls of the tank, the same material that had previously appeared on the clothing of the homeless Miguel. But now the lime became a much more disturbing sign, indicating a possible attempt to hide something important. Next to the edge of the tank lid, criminalists discovered small fragments of green fabric. It was a robust material that resembled jacket fabric, possibly the same one that little Selena spoke about when she remembered the man who carried heavy bags from Esther's yard. The resulting chain of evidence immediately prompted the investigators to act decisively. Raul was summoned for questioning again. He still appeared confident and showed no signs of disturbance. When asked what he knew about the sewage tank, Raul immediately answered, "This tank has not been used since 2019. I personally closed it and simply covered it with all kinds of garbage. There is nothing important there. Check it calmly 1,000 times." However, his words were contradicted by the statement of the neighbor, elderly Anna B., whose yard directly bordered Esther's property. The woman said with certainty, "I clearly remember the night of the 5th of May. There was a strong noise from Esther's yard, and it smelled very strongly of lime. The smell was almost suffocating. I could not mistake it. It was definitely lime. We often used it for soil treatment. The neighbor's statement strengthened the police's suspicion, although it gave no direct indication of Raul. This was only a confirmation that the tank was used on exactly that night. Meanwhile, the prosecutor's office tried to reduce the intensity of public tension by cautiously putting forward an alternative hypothesis. The prosecutor officially expressed the assumption that the object found by the ground-penetrating radar could merely be waste from goat slaughter, which Esther was engaged in. This time, however, the public and the press were extremely skeptical of this version. Hardly anyone believed that ordinary waste could trigger such great interest from the investigators and so many cover-up measures. Despite the weakness of the hypothesis, the prosecutor's office insisted that all versions had to be checked. However, the police's attention was already directed at something else, and the prosecutor's words changed nothing about the general attitude of the officers. They prepared to open the sewage tank. The court quickly issued a search warrant for the old sewage tank. The news spread immediately, and media representatives quickly arrived. The police erected a tent shelter to protect the area from possible rain and ensure the privacy of the procedure. Everything that happened was recorded by journalists from a distance. When the lid of the sewage tank was slowly lifted, all cameras in the vicinity were suddenly turned off. A police officer gave the strict order to end the recordings and explained to the press representatives that the content was too shocking and not intended for public viewing. The contents of the tank were immediately covered and carefully cordoned off with police tape, with no one allowed inside the perimeter. Despite the absence of an official explanation, those present understood that what was found was extremely important and highly disturbing. The experts from the forensic laboratory immediately began examining the find without losing time. Soon it became known that the found object was what they had been searching for more than 4 months. But an official identification had not yet taken place. The experts cautiously shared only one important detail with the investigators. Under the fingernails of the unknown object, fibers of green fabric were found, the same that was discovered next to the sewage tank. While the press speculated about what was happening behind closed doors, the police completely closed the laboratory and prevented all attempts at information leakage. Everyone who had followed the case from the beginning understood. The investigation had reached its critical point. Only one thing remained to find out: to whom exactly the found green fabric belonged, and how close the investigators had come to the finale. October 2021 became the final boundary for the investigation. After several weeks of silent and methodical work by the DNA laboratory experts, the analysis results were officially confirmed. The genetic material of the found remains matched the samples from Camila A, with an accuracy of 99.9%. This was the final and irrefutable fact that the investigation had waited for almost half a year. Furthermore, the laboratory made another important discovery. Under the fingernails, epithelial cells were found that belonged to Raul G., Esther's younger brother. The investigators immediately compared the biological material with Raul's external characteristics and discovered a fresh but already healing abrasion on the finger of his hand, which perfectly matched the type of traces found. Raul could not withstand the pressure of the evidence and confessed his involvement in the case. His confession sounded laconic and somewhat evasive. It was an accident. I simply misjudged my strength. She started screaming. I panicked. My sister knew absolutely nothing about it. The investigation approached its conclusion, and every previously incomprehensible detail now took its clear place. The mysterious bones in the pot, which had caused horror and panic in society, turned out to be merely Raul's own bone. While butchering a goat, he had accidentally injured his finger joint and thrown it into the general broth. The expertise confirmed that the blood found in the kettle came exclusively from goats. There was no cannibalism and no terrible rituals. The mysteriously disappeared smartphone of Camila was also found. It was not stolen or intentionally destroyed. The girl had accidentally dropped it in the yard of Esther's house, and Raul, who noticed it later, decided to get rid of it along the way by throwing the device into the grass near the canal, where the sneaker was also later found. The phone lay in the open until the battery was completely drained. The lime, which had become one of the main elements of the mystery, turned out to be Raul's banal attempt to slow down the natural decomposition process of the remains. He took it from the chicken coop, which was located directly on his sister's property. Exactly the traces of this lime were on the clothing of the homeless Miguel, who happened to be working nearby in those days. Nevertheless, even under the conditions of complete evidence, Raul was not ready to surrender easily. During a confrontation with the investigators and his sister, he suddenly changed his statement and shifted part of the blame to Esther. She called me and told me to simply close the pit. I did what she asked me to do. Esther, who had stoically endured all accusations until this moment, emotionally denied her involvement. But the prosecutor showed her the telephone call log, in which a call from Raul at 017 in the same night was recorded. In Esther's notebook, a short note was found that confirmed that the brother actually intended to close some pit. The court immediately qualified what had happened as premeditated murder of a minor with subsequent cover-up. Even without direct proof of intent, Raul's original confession in connection with the concealment of the fact of death was convincing enough for a strict qualification of the crime. In March 2022, the Tribunal of Tolima Province announced the final verdict. Raul G. received 30 years strict regime for murder, with subsequent concealment of the crime. His sister Esther, despite numerous rumors and the original version of her complete involvement, was sentenced to only 3 years probation for unintentional concealment. The court recognized that Esther was not involved in the events, but only acted under pressure of circumstances and tried to cover for her brother. No appeals followed against the verdict. The case was officially closed, and in the court decision it was stated briefly and clearly, a tragic accident, aggravated by the panic of the guilty party and false hypotheses that were blown up to absurdity by the press. The clarification of this sensational case did not occur thanks to outstanding talents of detectives, but exclusively thanks to the routine and methodical work of the utility services and forensic laboratories. It was the ordinary specialists of the waterworks and the experts of the DNA laboratory who put a final point in the investigation and discarded the loud but false versions that were so attractive to media and public. On the 6th of June 2022, Lana S. got off the school minibus Combi Escala in a quiet suburb 350 meters from her house and disappeared without a trace. A dusty, clay-colored Mercedes 608D on the roadside became the only clue in the first minutes after her disappearance. This case seemed simple, but it proved to be far more complicated and sinister than one could have imagined. Time passed. The rain erased the traces, and each new fact made the puzzle of her disappearance more complicated. 6th of June, 2022, Monday. At 14:57, the surveillance camera of a rural school on the outskirts of São Paulo records a moment that would soon become the key scene of this year's criminal chronicle. 9-year-old Lana S. calmly says goodbye to the driver of the minibus, Combi Escala, Cesar V, takes her backpack and walks with familiar confidence along the dirt road to her house. From the drop-off point to her door, it is only 350 meters. The path is completely visible. No blind spots, no abandoned buildings, no suspicious passers-by. Exactly 17 minutes later, Luana's mother comes to meet her daughter, as she had not waited for her usual return. The street is completely empty. Lana is nowhere to be seen. From this moment, the time of her disappearance begins to run. The first thing that draws police attention is a Mercedes 608D, a dusty clay-colored truck without any side advertising, parked on the roadside not far from the place of disappearance. Residents had seen it before but had not attached any special significance to it. Now, however, it stood at the center of the investigation. Around the vehicle, the usual environment of a rural suburb. Dust, dry bushes, and old asphalt broken down to gravel in places. Next to the truck, investigators discover a small item that immediately appears suspicious. In the grass lies a torn-off label with a QR code and the logo of the pawn shop, Lamig Feros. At first glance, this means nothing, but the police carefully pick it up and secure it as evidence. Nearby, on the dirt road, the investigators notice the weather forecast on their service tablet. In 90 minutes, heavy rain is expected. This means that any traces, tire, or shoe prints will be washed away. The police quickly establish three main versions of events. The first, the driver of the minibus, 54-year-old Cesar V. The man has been known to residents for a long time, fulfilled his duties impeccably for years, and never gave cause for questions. However, in such cases, the closest relatives and those who last saw the missing persons are always checked first. The second version, a shepherd, tenant of the neighboring field. An older, unsociable man who hardly associates with neighbors. His accommodation, a small house at the edge of the field, only 200 meters from the road where Lana disappeared. He claims to have seen or heard nothing, although he apparently should have noticed at least something unusual. The third version, an unknown driver or passenger of the Mercedes 608D. The vehicle remains a mystery. None of the residents can say who it belongs to and why it was standing exactly here. 1 hour after the search begins, police arrest the minibus driver, Cesar. He is surprised, confused, but offers no resistance. The investigators examine his vehicle carefully. The trip recorder had for some reason not recorded video during the crucial period from 1440 to 1530. In addition, police discover a GPS signal jammer in the minibus. Cesar claims to see this device for the first time and not to know where it came from. However, it quickly becomes clear that the driver is telling the truth. Cesar actually has nothing to do with Lana's disappearance. He was at a cafe at the specified time. Witnesses confirm his alibi. The jammer could have been deliberately placed to lead the investigation on a false trail, but who could have done this and why is unclear for now. At 1725, a new detail emerges in the investigation. A police drone of the BPRV captures a heat signature that suddenly breaks off near an old pump tower next to an abandoned bioethanol warehouse. The building is located about 1 kilometer from the site of Lana's disappearance. The area is fenced off, abandoned, surrounded by a strip of forest. The video signal from the drone breaks off abruptly. The technology fails its service at exactly this moment. 35 minutes remain until the onset of heavy rain. The investigators decide to urgently call in cave researchers from the fire department who can examine the underground spaces of the tower and the abandoned warehouse. Any delay threatens the loss of the last evidence. The police understand that technology is working against weather and time. Why had Cesar, the driver of the school combi with an impeccable reputation, activated the GPS signal jammer on this particular day? A seemingly simple question, but behind it lay a whole series of circumstances that could turn the course of the investigation upside down. Since Lana's disappearance, police had already checked and confirmed the minibus driver's alibi, but one thing remained completely unclear. Why did Cesar need the GPS jammer found in his combi? At first glance, there was nothing unusual about the actions of this quiet, middle-aged man. But the investigators knew that in such situations there are no coincidences. When reviewing the archives and reports of the local traffic police, the investigation comes across a strange detail. For 2 years in a row, Cesar had regularly ended up on the lists of traffic violators for route violations. The fines were minor, but they persistently pointed to one thing. The driver often used the bus not for its actual purpose. The official school route was recorded by the monitoring system and every deviation was punished. It turns out that Cesar offered private transport services using his service minibus. The customers were varied, from neighbors who urgently needed to transport something bulky to parents of students who paid the driver extra for delivering building materials directly home. These trips brought a small additional income, enough for Cesar to ignore the occasional fines. The investigation quickly confirms that Cesar had received cash payment from a parent exactly on the morning of the 6th of June, the day of Luana's disappearance, for express delivery of building materials. And obviously, to hide another illegal route from the monitoring system, the driver again resorted to a proven method. He turned on the GPS signal jammer. At first glance, the explanation is simple and logical. But the investigation keeps raising more questions. The investigators summon Cesar for questioning again. The conversation is fully recorded, without cuts or edits, as is customary in serious criminal cases. The police ask directly, "Why did you use the GPS jammer on this particular day?" Cesar answers without hesitation, "I turned it on so the dispatcher wouldn't see that I deviated from the standard route. In the morning, I delivered building materials to a nearby village, and that's forbidden according to school rules. I've done this before. I was paid in cash for such trips." The police record this answer and ask the next question. "But why did you turn onto the side road exactly at the moment of Luana's disappearance? That has nothing to do with the delivery you completed in the morning." Cesar answers that he simply wanted to take a shortcut because he was in a hurry to get home. However, this version raises doubts. The side road is longer than the main road and actually extends the route. Cesar visibly hesitates. The investigation notes this logical gap. He doesn't seem guilty, but he's obviously hiding something. While the police clarify small details about Cesar, forensic technicians continue to examine his small school bus. Inside, they find a new, strange piece of evidence: a long black hair on the driver's seat. The driver claims that only he uses the bus and no other passengers except students have gotten in. The forensic technicians immediately have a suspicion. The hair might belong to an unknown person connected to Luana's disappearance. However, the laboratory is overloaded. The DNA analysis takes time, and the results of the hair analysis will not be ready today. This delay forces the investigators to reassess their priorities. Attention shifts between the small bus and the enigmatic Mercedes 608D, which still stands at the roadside and is covered by drops of the setting rain. At 23:40, the investigator receives an urgent message from the ANP, National Agency for Petroleum and Fuels, on his service tablet. It turns out that the police also checked the fuel in the tank of Cesar's bus. The devices confirm that it is indeed diesel fuel, and everything seems normal until a strange detail emerges. The fuel receipt that the driver had issued on this day at exactly 12:05 proves to be forged. This is the official determination of the police. A receipt with a fake stamp, without confirmation of the actual fuel sale. The driver obviously wanted to hide the actual refueling or obscure the time and place of his whereabouts. This paper forgery appears insignificant given all the events, but exactly such details always become decisive in investigations. The police immediately direct an additional inquiry to the ANP to learn details about the gas station from which the forged receipt allegedly came. Exactly at this moment, the tablet signal suddenly breaks off. This means that the connection to the central database is interrupted and any new data is temporarily unavailable. At the same time, a new radio message comes in. The task force that is still keeping watch at the Mercedes 608D reports that the driver has finally returned to the vehicle. His identity was unknown until this point. The police immediately direct their entire attention to this person. Setting aside Cesar's minor offenses, the forces set about finding out who sits behind the wheel of the truck that stood all day near the location of Luana's disappearance. Now exactly this enigmatic Mercedes 608D becomes the center of the next investigation phase. What did Luana's family hide behind the seemingly simple land dispute with the local bioethanol cooperative? Old business conflicts, enigmatic messages, and strange finds around the abandoned pump tower. All of this wove together into a web of small and seemingly unconnected facts that could explain Luana's disappearance. While the police clarified the identity of the small bus driver, the second task force began checking Luana's family. This is standard procedure. Relatives are always the first to be checked by investigators when one of their family members disappears. But instead of the expected everyday conflicts and banal family disputes, the police encountered an unusual and complicated situation. It turned out that Luana's family had been in long and serious conflict with the local bioethanol cooperative. The cooperative owned the old pump tower and the warehouse, exactly there where the heat signature captured by the drone broke off. It became apparent that the land on which these abandoned structures stood had been the subject of lengthy court proceedings for several years. Luana's family claimed that part of the property belonged to them and had been unlawfully occupied by the cooperative. The conflict escalated on the 18th of May 2022, only a few weeks before Luana's disappearance, when her father officially filed a lawsuit against the cooperative. On the same day, the family received the first series of anonymous messages with threats of an indefinite nature. The messages came to the mobile phones of all family members. There were no demands or clear explanations in them, only hints of unpleasantness if the lawsuit was not withdrawn. The investigators quickly find out another important detail. Shortly before Luana's disappearance, the cooperative had commissioned subcontractors, independent scrap transporters, to dismantle old tanks and clean the area of metal scrap. The work did not appear suspicious until the police checked the names of the transporters. During questioning, the representative of the cooperative appears confident and calm. When asked by the police whether the subcontractors commissioned to dismantle the old structures had anything to do with the threats against Luana's family, he answers unambiguously, "Our subcontractors have a clean record. They work on a contract basis, are officially checked by the security department, and we trust these people. They had no problems with the law." However, the lawyer for Luana's family, present during the questioning, interrupts and immediately adds, "We have different information. The family received anonymous calls in which the driver of one of the scrap trucks clearly listed the names of municipal council officials and even some police officers. These calls were disguised, but it is completely obvious. The transporters knew about the lawsuit and clearly wanted to stop it." The investigation establishes a sharp contrast in the official statements. The cooperative denies any problems. The family's lawyer insists on the existence of threats and the involvement of unknown subcontractors in intimidation. In such a situation, the police cannot leave this version unchecked. The next find diverts the investigation from course and creates even more uncertainty. In the backyard of Luana's family, in an old, rarely used shed, the police unexpectedly find a metal sign with the inscription and QR code, Lamig Feros. Exactly the same sign had already been found on the enigmatic Mercedes 608D at the roadside on the day of Luana's disappearance. At first glance, this find appears strange. Why was a sign with the logo of a pawnshop or metal trade located precisely at the family that claims to be pursued by scrap transporters? This plunges the police into an even greater dead end. While forensic technicians try to determine the origin of the metal sign and find its owner, the investigators return again to the main mystery. What exactly happened between Luana's family and the cooperative? And who could really be behind the threats? Morning of the 7th of June, 5:58. While the investigators examine the details of the land dispute, a search helicopter of the Fire MG Fire and Rescue Service again flies over the area around the old pump tower. Now the police have a highly sensitive FLIR camera that can detect minimal heat several meters deep underground. Exactly at this moment, the camera captures a distinct heat spot about 6 meters below the head of the old pump tower. The signal is completely clear, stable, and distinct. The police immediately draw the conclusion: Luana is most likely alive, but is in an extremely difficult to access location, possibly in an old technical shaft or underground tank. The forces immediately call rescuers equipped with heavy equipment for lifting and lowering into shafts. Time is again working against the police. The announced rain has begun. Any delay could lead to complete flooding of the underground tanks where Luana is presumably located. The rescue group begins setting up the equipment. A stable tripod is erected. A backup winch that can carry up to 80 kilograms of load is prepared. The heavy rain is already pouring down and threatens to flood everything underground. Police and rescuers act silently and quickly, knowing well that it is a matter of minutes. Meanwhile, the police task force is already working in parallel on a new clue: the metal sign, Lamig Feros. Whoever left this sign in the family shed and next to the road obviously tried to cover tracks and hide true motives. During Luana's rescue from the shaft, her jacket becomes the key to the puzzle. A tiny oil stain with an unusual chemical composition is discovered on it. This seemingly insignificant stain transforms the investigation into a chemical puzzle that leads the police to unexpected findings and witnesses. The rescue operation is completed quickly and professionally. Luana is carefully retrieved from the shaft of the old pump tower in pouring rain and immediately handed over to the medics. At this moment, the forensic technicians notice a small detail that is almost invisible at first glance. On Luana's jacket, there is a tiny oil stain of unusual color and consistency. Normally, such minor details are ignored, but now every detail of the investigation gains the value of gold. The stain is immediately handed over to a mobile laboratory that is housed directly in the patrol car at the scene. It is a modern forensic facility called FASTDNA that can detect complex chemical compositions and DNA connections in a matter of minutes. The specialists quickly share the results. The oil belongs to a rare lubricant of the NR150 series. It is used exclusively in lifting platforms and gripper mechanisms of heavy construction and lifting machines. Next to the shaft, the forensic technicians also find a piece of a cargo strap with traces of light sand-colored paint RAL 1001. Exactly the same color tone had the mysterious Mercedes 608D that was previously parked on the street. Now the connection becomes too obvious to be coincidental. The investigators immediately contact the subcontractors of the company, Lamig Feros, which had already appeared several times in the case. The subcontractors are questioned via official video conference. The company representative explains categorically, "All our cargo straps are exclusively blue. The color RAL 1001 is not used in our equipment. You are confusing something there." However, the investigators receive an opposite confirmation almost immediately. Using the automatic weighing system Pesa Fácil installed on the highway, the police capture the Mercedes 608D exactly on the day of Luana's disappearance. The cameras automatically record the truck without side panels. The driver cannot be identified. The face is covered by a cap. But the color of the strap with which the load was secured is clearly visible, and it is exactly sand-colored RAL 1001, not blue. This direct contradiction between statements and facts forces the police to focus precisely on this truck. The police quickly find the owner of the Mercedes 608D. The owner, a middle-aged man, strong, 183 centimeters tall, denies his involvement. To confirm his words, he brings his wife, who unexpectedly explains that exactly she was behind the wheel on the said day. The woman tries to take the blame upon herself, obviously with the desire to remove her husband from suspicion. However, the police immediately check this version using a video analysis system. The height of the driver's silhouette in the recording from Pesa Fácil is exactly 183 centimeters. This corresponds exactly to the man's height, and clearly does not match the height of his wife, who is only 157 centimeters. The woman quickly retracts her statement and tries to explain her behavior with emotional shock. The false statement not only confuses the investigation, but additionally confirms the police's suspicion regarding the involvement of the Mercedes driver in Luana's disappearance. The situation changes abruptly when the mobile forensic laboratory FASTDNA conducts an urgent genetic examination directly on site of another important piece of evidence that was previously discovered in the interior of the truck. The hair that had previously been found in Cesar's minibus. Within minutes, the results of the DNA analysis become known to the investigation. The complete match of all 13 genetic loci points to a specific person. The owner of the hair is clearly identified. It is Elizu M., a person who had not appeared in the investigation files until now, but has now become the main suspect. At this moment, the police have a real, tangible lead for the first time. But the motive and the role of Elizu M. in the events are still completely unclear. He knew neither Luana's family nor Cesar, nor the owner of the truck. Nevertheless, his DNA now becomes irrefutable evidence. The investigator, aware of the full significance of the moment, immediately switches to the cloud surveillance system CINESP Placas. This modern technology enables the police to track vehicle routes in real time. The investigator creates a detailed scheme of the route on which Elizu M. moved on the day of Luana's disappearance. This scheme becomes the last puzzle piece in the chain of mysteries and leads the investigation to resolution. Now the entire focus is directed toward finding a connection between Elizu and those who already played a role in the case, as well as clarifying his true motive. Small details no longer seem insignificant. They have come together into a clear picture that finally enables the police to identify a concrete suspect. In the early morning of the 8th of June at 6:47, the police arrest Elizu M. In his own house, he offers no resistance. In the first interrogation, which is conducted with particular operational precision, he admits briefly and dryly. He planned to hide Luana in the well near the old pump tower only until nightfall, after which he intended to take her to another location. The motive of his actions is immediately classified by the investigation as obvious and extremely disturbing, but without superfluous emotional details. From this moment on, the investigation goes into the mode of technical and methodical reconstruction of all events. Every piece of evidence previously collected receives a clear explanation and its place in the chain of evidence. The cloud surveillance system CINESP Placas shows the police investigators an important moment. The Mercedes 608D, which had previously raised many questions, turned onto the side road at exactly 15:06, which corresponds exactly with the period in which Luana disappeared from sight on her short way home. This fact connects Elizu M. irrefutably with the location and time of Luana's disappearance. Subsequently, the forensic technicians clarify the origin of the lubricant NR150 that was previously found on Luana's clothing. The investigation confirms that this lubricant is only used in portable lifting platforms of a special type that were available to Elizu. These lifting platforms were used to carefully lower a person into a narrow well without causing serious physical harm. The paint chip from the cargo strap, identified as color RAL1001, becomes the last link in the chain. The police confront Elizu with this evidence. He does not deny it and confirms that the truck he was traveling with was indeed sand-colored and was used for transporting tools and equipment, including the lifting platform. At the same time, the investigation finally exonerates Cesar and the shepherd tenant, who played a role in the first versions. The analysis of the 3G modems from the bus and the GPS data of the shepherd completely confirms their alibi. All movements of these persons were reconstructed, and their non-involvement was proven with technical means of the 21st century, dryly and without emotions. When the police begin transporting Elizu M. to the detention prison in Patos de Minas, a brief incident occurs. The suspect unexpectedly tries to free his hands by literally biting into the metal handcuffs to loosen the grip. The patrol officers react immediately. Instead of using violence or emotional threats, they calmly and coldly fix the arrested person's hands to the vehicle frame with a cable tie. This brief episode emphasizes that the police handle the situation strictly technically and professionally and do not make a dramatic event out of it. For the investigation, this is simply another work situation that is quickly resolved without superfluous words and emotions. In December 2023, Elizu M. is sentenced to 31 years of strict imprisonment after an exhausting court proceeding. The verdict takes effect immediately and is legally binding. The defense does not file an appeal, The presented evidence is too solid and clear. For the court and investigation, the case is closed. There are no emotional speeches, moral sermons, or profound moral conclusions. Simply the establishment of facts. The criminal is punished. The investigations are completed.